I want to welcome on into the program Matthew Hurtt. Matthew, always great to have you on. So let's talk about a number of things because there's a lot going on with Israel and Iran. One of the things that I find interesting is this story out today that supposedly, and I don't know if this has been confirmed, but I think Reuters had it and Axios had it as well, that supposedly you had Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu going to Donald Trump and saying, we have an opportunity to take out Iran's supreme leader. And supposedly Donald Trump vetoed the idea. And this has caused all kinds of anger and disagreement within, Trump's world and within conservative circles. Number one, do you believe the story? And number two, do you have any thoughts?
Dan, I'm not sure what I believe in this story. I do think that Donald Trump was elected to keep us out of war. And if this conversation took place, this is a situation where he made the calculation that an escalation to that extent would drag us into something. I am hopeful that whatever Israel is engaged in with Iran is isolated to those two countries. I know France and some other countries have offered to provide aerial support to defend Israel. But this is something I think Trump made one of those art of the deal style calculations, moving into what is unknown and what we cannot quite, it's so baffling, Dan, I can't even wrap my head around it this morning. That's how challenging this is, understanding, what Israel is engaged in with Iran.
One of the things, and I saw this last night, there's this conversation about whether or not, President Trump vetoed such an action by Israel. Number one, Israel is its own country. So Israel's going to do what Israel's going to do. But number two is, they spoke about how in this article, I think it was in Politico, but I'm not sure. I read so much. But about how from a foreign wars standpoint, you have a lot of people on the right, including someone like Tucker Carlson, who they are just anti getting involved in any way, shape, or form. And if Trump does, or anybody within the conservative movement supports Israel trying to take out Iran, well, then you are automatically called a warmonger. You're automatically called a neocon as well, which I'm going to be honest, I think that's a little unfair because, there are some things, and trust me when I say, I'm not one that wants us to get involved in foreign wars at all. But I also don't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon.
Yeah, this is a great question to play out. Has Iran for decades been an antagonist in the Middle East? Yes. Have they funded operations to target Israel? Yes. Are they, even in this escalation over the weekend, Israel targeted military installations and national security items in Iran, and Iran launched missiles and killed a handful of civilians. It's clear that there is a difference in the way these two countries are engaging in this activity. I also, as a small libertarian, am generally not in favor of foreign adventurism. So that is just going into countries with no plan and half-heartedly. This is a situation where Israel is a target of its enemies in the Middle East, and Israel is an ally of the United States. So it is in our interest to defend them in situations like this. If, for instance, Iran and some other actors in the Middle East escalate their attacks in the country of Israel.
All right. So here in America, we, of course, had the No Kings protest over the weekend across the country. And, somebody asked me a question over the weekend. I was talking about this in the 5 o'clock hour. And somebody said, all of these protests, what is the call to action? And there is none.
Yeah, that's what I noticed. I drove around Arlington on Saturday, and now Arlington is a place where 79% of voters voted for Kamala Harris. It is deep blue. These individuals are overwhelmingly federal employees or in some auxiliary company, and there was a large presence. We have a state route that runs through the north part of the county called Lee Highway or Langston Boulevard now, and they had pretty well covered several miles of that. But these individuals are leftists. They are they have never supported Donald Trump, and certainly need an instance where they can get out. A lot of the folks who were involved were old Vietnam War era protesters who were just longing for the old days of a good protest. The left has a protest culture. The right does not have as strong a protest culture. We saw it in the Tea Party days. We've seen it in MAGA rallies, but we don't quite see it the way that we see it on the left. They love a good reason to protest, and they were out in force over the weekend.
I wanted to play this for you only because I find it very funny. This was one of these protesters here in Nashville. Listen to this.
No one is free until everyone is free.
No one is free until everyone is free.
No one is free until everyone is free.
It's so nonsensical. Do they even know what they're saying?
Yeah, this is when you get a bunch of folks into a protest or into a group demographic or dynamic, people don't understand either what they're doing or certainly not what they're saying. The people who just show up to kind of see what's going on, you hear lines like this all the time. A lot of the man on the street interviews you see at protests and rallies yield this kind of result. It's not something that is especially surprising to me.
But then I had a leftist send me a warning on social media. I've got that coming up. So, Matthew, one of my leftist listeners said, "Oh, Mandis, you better be careful. Look at this turnout across the country, the No Kings rally. You guys are in trouble in the midterms." And my simple response to that person was, Republicans turn out when it matters. Like, for example, in November of 2024.
You know, that's a great point, Dan. I think that what we have here is a foundation of energy. It is June of 2025. We've got another, 15, 16 months until the midterm elections. If groups like Indivisible and the others that were behind the No Kings rallies and protests over the weekend, if they're able to continue the momentum by March or April of next year, this could be an energy that would be difficult for Republicans to overcome. However, people do have, and as I've said a ton of times on this program, people have a short political memory and a short attention span. 15 months is a long time from today, and a lot of stuff can happen between now and next October when most voters start cluing in.
I love Donald Trump's response. I was talking about this earlier. Apparently this was on Twitter. 4702 said, because I was trying to figure out where the heck this happened, but Trump, his response, a huge thank you to all of the No Kings protesters yesterday. He says, I was very concerned a king was going to take my place, but thanks to your tireless efforts, I am still your president. Great job, all. Very funny. I love, it's just a great, brilliant troll.
That is, Donald Trump has a humor about him, and this is one of those instances. Bravo, Mr. President.
One of the things that I read over the weekend, too, is as organized as the Democrats look right now, there's actually still a lot of disarray going on within the Democrat Party. Talk about what is going on at the national level.
This is a great point. You can't beat someone with no one. And when you run the generic ballot in the midterm elections in 2026, generic Democrat may get close to generic Republican, but you have to have somebody in the seat. There has to be a candidate in the race. Mm-hmm. And the Democrats, they've ousted David Hogg from the Democrat National Committee. There is not a clear leader. In recent polls, Kamala Harris is the person they want to put up for president again. And so the Democratic Party is got a soul search. It doesn't look like they're doing that. You and I have talked about this a number of times, but until they can come up with a message that isn't just we're anti-Donald Trump, a message that resonates with voters and messengers who can carry that message, they are going to have trouble making the case to voters.
One of the things I find interesting with all of this is that you have Republicans, I think by and large, even though there's been some disagreement with Donald Trump over a few things. For example, last week, Trump came out and said that he's devising a plan to protect farmers or farm workers. If you remember, I think we talked about this, where the president says, you know what, our farmers are in trouble and need their farm workers. we need to protect those illegal alien farm workers. And he talked about farmers. He talked about, if I'm not mistaken, the hospitality industry. Then, of course, construction is going to raise their hands and say, hello. So you see the president now sort of going back a little bit more towards the middle on illegal immigration. But then what's strange, Matthew, is that he comes out with this big, long proclamation on the socials this morning where he says that it's time to start ramping up the deportations. Is he sending mixed messages?
Yeah, this is a little confusing. I know as been tracking the polls, and an overwhelming majority of Americans want secure borders. They want to stop the flow of illegal immigration. Once you dig into the should people be pulled out of their homes in ICE raids, the numbers dip quite significantly, and that is just a difference in the philosophy or the position and the process. And that's a good question. I think that Donald Trump is paying attention to how the American people react and respond. I think that he's right on a lot of the domestic issues. And sometimes it's in the execution of those issues where the American people lose sight of what he's trying to solve. And so that's the big question, particularly as it pertains to illegal immigration. The polls are overwhelmingly in favor of securing the border and eliminating the criminal element and the threat. But the polls dip when you get into some of the execution of the policy.
You know, it does seem like if the president wanted to protect those workers, hospitality, restaurants, farm workers, whatever. But it seems like what he could very easily do is just fix the broken visa program. I mean, isn't that the solution to that problem?
Look, the visa program is, we have a pretty wild immigration system. I know firsthand about visas. We process them as interns at where I work full time. I've got friends who are visa holders. And it is infinitely easier to come across the border illegally than it is to secure a visa. If you want to come to this country, if you want to pay taxes, if you want to contribute to America's greatness, it is infinitely harder to do that than it is to just come across the border. And then we create this subculture and sub-economy of people who are working, many of whom are working. They're getting paid under the table. And then we see situations like we've seen over the last week or so, where people who voted for Donald Trump, business owners, are now seeing their factories and places raided, and a third of their employees are being deported. And so that is where, the hiccup between the complex visa process and creating a black market, essentially, of employees and workers who aren't supposed to be here.
All right, Matthew Hurtt, how can people find you on X?
I'm on X at Matthew Hurtt, MatthewHurtt.